Hit it.
Hello and welcome to the Medical Ancillary Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Berg, and joined by my co-host, Vivian Hudson. How are you, Viv?
I'm great, thanks, Mike. And I know today that you've got a special announcement around our podcast moving forward. So tell our listeners about that.
So we've had a great response to this podcast. This has really been a rewarding part of what we do day to day, Viv. This is our little respite to be able to reflect and sit back. And I know you and I are on the same page in that part of the reason we do this is because we really enjoy helping other people. I love to see other people achieve their goals, and in whatever small way we can contribute, that's what we're here for. Now, you may have noticed if you listen to the podcast, some of these are sales topics that we cover and how to become a more effective sales rep in the field. And then we also cover some different ancillary programs. Well, we have teamed up with a Dr. Pollack who runs the Medical Practice Trends podcast, which is a fantastic podcast, very well produced, huge listenership. And this podcast is geared at physicians and clinic managers. And what they cover are different trends in the medical industry, in running a practice. And we have formed a partnership with this duo that run that podcast to do a sister podcast, which we're going to be calling the medical, what are we calling it?
Ancillary Trends.
Medical Practice Ancillary Trends podcast. So in this podcast, this is going to be geared at physicians. This is going to be a tool that you guys in the field can use. And we always talk about bringing value to physicians. This is a way that you can bring value. You let them know about the Medical Practice Trends podcast. This is something that every clinic manager and every independent physician should be listening to. And then within that, they're going to have a couple additional podcasts that cover some technology trends and some ancillary trends. And so Vivian and I are going to be running the podcast that covers the ancillary trends. And on this podcast, we are going to be doing interviews, much like the ones you've been hearing on this podcast. I think the first episode, we have an interview covering the VAT device again. And that is where we're going to be covering new programs. And this podcast, we're going to gear it more toward just keep it to sales topics and making sure that helping people become more effective reps. Now, in that light, since we're going to be doing two podcasts, we're now going to be doing this as a once-a-week podcast, and then we have the other podcast to dovetail along with this one. So we're still bringing you content, but we're going to have two different RSS feeds starting in April. So if you do not see a podcast come up on your feed on Thursday, you know why. We're only going to be releasing podcasts on Monday from now on and just covering sales topics, and I will be blasting out a link and including a link. I'll embed that into the notes for our podcast on where you can find the other podcast. Okay, I think I covered that.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So anyway, we're going to be very professional in the other podcast. So look forward to seeing a new us, right?
A new us. Yes, this is a little more highly produced, and we will be. And again, this is geared at the physician market. So these are podcasts that you could have your physicians listen to and get some quality information about the different programs. And if you have a program that you're trying to pitch to your doctor, you'll be able to pull up those podcast episodes and say, Doc, you might want to listen to this, because again, we are gearing these podcasts with the physician market in mind. Now, just to reset for today, Viv, we're running short on time already because of course I'm palavering on here. But we spoke about in the last podcast what is the role of what is a medical ancillary consultant? And we've spoken before about the rise of medical ancillaries and how this is really the prime time to be a medical ancillary consultant. This is what physicians are looking for right now. And there's really three reasons to do it. As you've mentioned, Viv, your three pillars are it's got to make money, it's got to be good for the patient, and what was the third pillar?
It's got to be ethical, so start compliant, etc. Yeah.
Right. And there's a new layer that's been added in recently in the wake of MACRA and MIPS. And if you really want to be a true consultant to your physicians, the number one thing that physicians are uneducated about, but they're curious about, is how to boost their quality scores. I think a lot of physicians are not familiar with MACRA and MIPS, exactly what that's going to mean for them and their practice. And if you can come in as a consultant and give them an overview, say, Doc, this is what MACRA and MIPS is, this is what it's going to mean for your practice, this is how you can take advantage of it and work this in your favor. But first and foremost, Viv, for those who are unfamiliar, can you give us an overview of what MACRA is and what it's there for?
Right. So MACRA was basically, it's an extension of the PQRS and meaningful use that many doctors would be familiar with from the last couple of years. And that's where programs like the annual wellness visit and chronic care management came into light and really helped doctors really focus on patient outcomes. And at the end of the day, MACRA, people could look at it, or physicians could look at it as an extra layer of compliance. But what it really is about is really giving the doctors feedback on patient outcomes. So I think that that's an important perspective to look at, and you as consultants out there can be conveying that information to doctors to make them, like, if we know that we're being policed to another level, it kind of has that negative connotation in our own mind. So really it's about CMS creating a layer of support to help doctors, give them the feedback on how well they're doing. So the impact for doctors, as always, looking at benefits to the patient, whether it's ethical and whether it makes money, it certainly ticks all those boxes. So if you have a physician that's engaged in MACRA, basically what it's helping them to do is to identify some different areas in their practice that they would like to get some quality scores on, and they can certainly pick and choose which areas they would like to do. So whether it's stuff to do with mental health, or whether it's to do with reduced hospitalizations, and ultimately that's what the program's about, is reducing hospitalizations. But from that perspective, it then enables the physician to start to engage in the program in a way that fits with their practice, not against their practice. So I think that that's another key component. So you as a consultant can go in and talk to doctors about what they feel that they're doing well, and then finding programs that support what they're doing and what they're doing well at, and helping them then to support those patient outcomes to attain those MACRA scores. And there was an article that I think I sent you a couple of days ago, Mike, that showed exactly what the dollars and cents component is, because we all want to know what's in it for me. So from that perspective, if a doctor is doing well, basically they can get anywhere from, I think it's like $4,000 to $12,000 more in revenue per every $100,000 of Medicare revenue that practice generates. So doctors can engage in the program in a variety of ways, so they can kind of do it as a self-reported, self-paced manner. So for this first year, they can just choose to submit for a 90-day period. And if that's the case, then they would go into that bucket that might get like $4,000 extra. And if they do like the whole year, and because they're super reporters and they want to provide that additional level of information because they're super organized and they kind of get the concept, and then they're looking at a much higher reimbursement. So they're looking at, I think it's $8,000 to $12,000 to be in that top tier bucket. So it certainly does benefit them financially. On the contrary, there is doctors will have a lower reimbursement, so they could lose up to $4,000 for every $100,000 for non-compliance in this program. And I guess I should probably steer away from using the word compliance, because we really want doctors to understand that this is an outcomes-based approach. So I'll come up for air and
well, it does. It does. I hate to give credit to a government agency. That's not like me. But there actually is some reasoning behind MACRA and MIPS. And if you have a doctor that's engaged and is clever, they can understand that this really could work strongly in their favor. I know this sounds like it's just another layer of compliance, but it really is about patient outcomes and controlling costs. It's only good for the patient if they have less hospital visits. If you're able to cut down on your hospital visits from 50 of your senior patients having a hospital visit in the last year, if 50 of them went to the hospital, probably 15 or 20 of those were due to a fall, just as an example. If you were able to cut those 20 patients down to, say, 5 patients because you're running the VAT device and they're going through the exercises and you're retesting them, well, not only are you making money on that device, on that CPT code, but you're also able to generate these quality scores and boost your MACRA scores, which could lead to, as you said, an 8 to 12% increase. And we had spoken about, about a year ago, I remember speaking about the disappointment that physicians had because 2017 was supposed to be the first Medicare pay increase in 5 years. They've had pay decreases for the past 5 years in a row, and this year was supposed to be a very modest, I think it was 0.5% pay increase. But once the budget committee got it and they went through, I guess there were some loopholes in there and they were able to make that a 0.3% decrease. So they had yet another pay decrease coming from Medicare. So I know that has a lot of physicians disillusioned, thinking, geez, how the heck am I going to stay in business with these constant pay decreases from Medicare? Well, this is how you do it. You do it through boosting your quality scores. And the doctors that aren't paying attention to their quality scores, yeah, those are the ones who are going to be in that small percentage of independent doctors that end up having to sell. But the ones who have a Medicare population where they understand how they can use MACRA to benefit their practice, not only with better patient outcomes, but also more revenue in their pocket from these programs and a pay increase from Medicare if they follow all these steps. That's very valuable information that you're bringing that physician.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, many small independent practices are actually coming up with better patient outcomes than some of these larger groups. So, when you're in there talking to doctors, just acknowledge them for doing a good job and hanging in there as a private practice physician, because often we don't get acknowledged enough in life, and I'm kind of a bit of a softie like that I think it's important that we acknowledge other people for what they do well. So if you walk into a doctor's office as a consultant and say, hey doc, if it wasn't for physicians like yourself, your community wouldn't be nearly as healthy as what they are today, because I understand, that you really put yourself into your patient outcomes. If you think about working in a large organization, you can very much feel like part of a number, just a number. And when you run your own practice, people look at you as the practice is your name, not a group of doctors. So,
Viv, what would be a few questions give me a couple questions that you would use as conversation starters if you're approaching, it could be a physician you already know or a cold call. How do you get that conversation started around quality scores?
Okay, well, I guess there's, as a bit of background, there's probably 3 buckets of physicians that you look at. So one of them is going to be totally up to speed and already applying MACRA. The next group is going to be those that have a little bit of an idea about it, but not really embracing the program or perhaps knowing where to start. And then the third group is the ones that have absolutely no idea what you're talking about when you talk about MACRA. So I guess rather than assuming any one of those, the first start would be, so doc, what's been your experience around MACRA? What's your understanding of MACRA? Or what is your practice doing towards MACRA? So just getting them to have an open conversation. So don't just say ask for a yes or no answer, because that's not going to give you the dialogue that you're looking for. But always start that question with, what do you currently know? Because you don't want to tell them anything that they already know. Or you can say, what concerns do you have around MACRA and MIPS? And just find out from them what they do know, and then ask them, well, what if they do seem to know something about it, then you can ask them, well, what are you actively doing about MACRA, and what areas are you really looking to seek improved scores on, because perhaps I've got something that I can use, that I can offer you to help you. So that's probably a good place to start. And if they're not sure, then you can introduce them to programs like the VAT and like the mental health programs, because they're very much on the physician's agenda as far as looking for different programs that will help them to achieve those scores. So that would be a good place to start for sure. So, that's...
Absolutely. I think most reps, you can really separate yourself from the herd, because most sales reps are going in there trying to push their own program. But I think if you take a more holistic approach to the practice and ask some open-ended questions, what is your practice doing to address MACRA and MIPS? Are you guys participating in any programs to improve your quality scores? How do you think that's going to impact your practice? Are you aware that you could potentially get an 8 to 12% increase in your Medicare reimbursements by taking full advantage of the different programs that are available? And any of those things are going to pique their interest. So, Viv, we're running over on time as always. So thank you for that great insight. We'll look forward to speaking to you guys next week.
Thanks, Mike.
You can climb a mountain. You can swim the sea.